All right, well, here we go. Okay, welcome back to Beyond the Message. Oh, my God, I'm your host, Gordon. I'm joined by CJ and Jenny.
Hey.
Oh, my gosh, we're talking about, I'm going to mute my phone because that's still going. All right, we're talking about the series, the video, the sermon from Sunday.
Labor.
Talking about work. I hate work. You guys hate work. We all hate work, but you guys don't hate work because you work for the church, and it's such a blessing. That's all anybody missed. If you were watching the muted version, that's all you missed. But we're back for real now.
Yes.
And we're back to actually talking about church. Let me actually pull the stream back up so that people can tell us. Jordan, thank you for the help, for the heads up. If you hadn't have said that, we would still just be talking.
Yes.
We would have had
silence.
a great
We had a great conversation.
The three of us.
Okay, so, yeah. So what we were talking about before we found out that nobody knew what we were talking about, we were talking about work, and I was kind of bringing up this question because for me, that this is something I've always sort of struggled with, is this idea that, you know, your labor, your work needs to be worship and is therefore a good thing. I am very much the whole... I don't want to say I'm necessarily burned out because when I find things I enjoy doing or want to do, like this show or, you know, groups or whatever, anything, I love it and do it with like full attention and energy. So it's more, it's like, what's the point of working? It just feels pointless. It's, you know, we're all, I guess that's what I was kind of getting to though. Is asking you guys, like, working, you know, when you work for the church, is there almost like I don't know the right question to ask, but maybe like a difficulty in sort of separating, because you're in everything you do is almost God-focused. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but, you know, it's almost like you're working and serving in the church. And when do you get that time? You know, Josh talked about Sabbath and how important Sabbath and resting is too, and that's part of it. And, you know, how do you kind of navigate all that as you know, you're working for the church, you're serving the church, pretty much your whole life is the church. But what about your own life with God and that own walk? And is there any issues there that you found? Maybe I'm not wording it right, but I think you get what I'm kind of getting at. Jenny's got it. Okay.
I am so excited that we're talking about this. So I'm in grad school right now, and we just completed a whole semester about the importance of community, and we were asked to kind of explore a question that was personal to us. And so the question I spent my semester researching was, how do you radically show up for other people while still maintaining healthy boundaries? Because for me, boundaries are a really difficult thing. I like to be always present for people, but with always being present for other people, I wasn't being present with myself. I wasn't being present with my family, my friends, with God. So I do think, at least for me, and CJ, you can speak into your experience, but for me, working at a church, the most difficult part has been feeling like I'm on call 24/7. And a lot of that is just, there are volunteers who are working, and so their work hours are the same as my work hours, so we have to either meet up or communicate after. So for them, it's, hey, this is an area of my life that I'm excited to give back into. For me, it feels like an extension of my work day. And not to say that's a bad thing, but if you do that too many times, then you realize, oh, all of a sudden I'm working 10-hour days every single day of the week. And so I've had to learn that even though I care about people and I care about being available for people, sometimes removing myself out of those situations or removing my availability actually allows me to be more present for people when I actually have to be on. So it's an interesting dynamic being in ministry, because there is the potential of feeling like I'm just in ministry every waking moment of my life. And I wouldn't trade it for the world, but I think boundaries are a very important and necessary thing.
To piggyback on that, I'll try to keep it as pretty simple as possible. I have this thing, amazing thing called a wife and kids. And so they almost like just my wife, especially, she has no problem saying, okay, it's time to turn off. And my kids, obviously kids have no understanding or anything of any of this.
Right.
So it's like, so that naturally helps me to create like certain boundaries. Like, all right, like I can't do this because I have to go on a date with my wife, or I have to tickle my daughter, or my son likes to fight. I have to fight my son. So like stuff like that, like just quite naturally creates those boundaries. But the other thing is, I've only been doing full-time ministry for maybe about 6 years or something like that now. So fairly new compared to the giants who've been in the game forever. But I've learned even in a short time to be completely honest and transparent with God. Like when I'm feeling like, God, like this. At first, I got into a bad habit of trying to fake it. And, you know, even just coming from corporate, you know, you got the whole fake it till you make it thing. So you come in, I came into ministry with that same mindset, you know, I got to fake it. I'm good. And I was like, I'm not good. And then it got to a point where I couldn't even fake it anymore. It's like, I can't even like pretend to smile. And it's like, I'm not helpful to anybody else pretending. So what do? I honestly just bring it up in prayer. Like, God, like I'm finished. Like I have nothing. Like I'm tired. Like I need you to give me some type of boost, give me some type of motivation, energy, something. And I tell people sometimes I hate getting too quote unquote overly spiritual. We could get into a conversation on if there's even a such thing. But I hate getting too spiritual, but it's like I've watched God like miraculously give me energy, miraculous. And sometimes he even just shows me what to focus on. Sometimes he'll just like redirect your focus. And what you focus me on something that actually gives me energy. And like, that's what he really wants me to focus on, energy anyway. So yeah.
No, I think that makes sense. And I think it's just important to, like you guys were saying, be mindful of yourself, because you can get that no matter what you're doing. Even just, I know for me, and I was kind of thinking that for myself, my wife loves to tell me that, like, do you maybe think you're taking on too much? And I'm like, it's fine. After this next thing, that's when it'll be too much. And how easy it can be to, even with good intentions. That's, I think, the other side of burnout. This idea of burnout has such a negative connotation in that, like, it's almost connected to laziness. And I know, because it's, I mean, in fairness, and Josh was kind of talking about the different generations on Sunday, and burnout is very closely tied to this like millennial Zoomer generation, and we all think they're just the laziest, right? Every generation thinks that the next generation is. But I think there's that other side of burnout that you were kind of getting at there, CJ, and you too, Jenny, which is, no, you just do too much. You have just overworked yourself to the point that you are totally drained. And I don't think this is necessarily a new problem, but I think it's a problem made a lot worse by like computers and social media, which is how we relaxation and the way, and we talked about this back when we did our Sabbath series, but I think it bears repeating. You know, God wants us, godly rest is not watching Netflix or playing video games or even reading a book. You know, it's resting in his presence and his peace, and like you were saying, getting energy from him in a spiritual way. And I think that's kind of another side of it, of this whole work discussion is, are you just doing too much? And therefore you're spreading yourself too thin. And so when you get to your actual job, right, you don't even have the energy to do it right. And I think that's an interesting thing to kind of think about. Especially because it is such a big part of our lives. I know Josh was saying, and when you think about it, it really is depressing. 8 hours of work 5 days a week is essentially like a quarter of your life. And then you sleep. That was just the worst. He was talking about sleeping too. It's like half my life.
I'm never going to sleep again.
I went the other way. I quit my job last night. So I gave him Josh's number. It's like, you could talk to this guy. He opened my eyes about work. So I think there's just so many sides to it. But what do you guys think about this idea, like falling into that kind of trap of burnout and just not seeing, I guess that's the big question.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we're going to explore this more in the series, but how do you see work, especially, but not limited to, I really like Josh's example there that he said that. Mm-hmm. He said, I forget the exact wording, but he was like, some of you are worried about how you're going to put food on the table tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And others of you are not worried at all, exactly, because you have, more wealth, whatever, mm-hmm. but you're both still dreading Monday. Mm-hmm. Like, it doesn't matter what you do. You could have the worst job in the world. Mm-hmm. You could have the best job in the world, mm-hmm. but that anxiety that just surrounds work does not care about that. Yeah. So what do you guys kind of think about that? How do you get past that? Because how do you get past that idea that this is worth doing?
Yeah, I think a lot. I mean, I can talk from personal experience, and even as you were talking about that, this current generation, mm-hmm. like how this generation kind of deals with that. I think a lot of it has to go with like finding purpose, mm-hmm. like in what you do.
Yeah.
I can think the times in my life where I felt like burnout or whatever. I had lost a sense of purpose, mm-hmm. of why I was doing whatever it is I was doing. And it goes back to me saying, God, a lot of times just refocused me. Mm-hmm. It's like, let me get you back to the focus of like why you're doing this. It's not, it's not about this, or it's not about that, or it's not just to put food on the table. So it's when you get into and I'm sure a lot of us has probably gotten to the point where I'm just putting food on the table. And when it gets to that, it becomes like laborious. I'm like, right. What am I doing? It's mm-hmm. like, you can't work hard enough to put, food right. on the table. So, with me, I always go back to the purpose. Once I refocus, and sometimes you need a new purpose.
Yeah.
Sometimes seasons change, and the reason you was doing something in one season and that gave you energy. And I could talk about this, not to go off on a tangent. I could talk about this when it comes to like exercise. There was a season in my life where I was exercising for one purpose and like for one reason. Then I didn't have that same drive to continue to exercise for that reason. But then my purpose switched when my kids came. Like, oh, this isn't for me. This is for the kids now. Or now it's not even for the kids. Now it's because people hit me up and ask me, CJ, what can I do to like work out? And now it's for other people. So the purpose will often switch. And I think you just got to stay attuned to the purpose in the season, the mm-hmm. purpose in the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I was going to say a lot of what you just said, but for me in the past, again, speaking from my experience, I've noticed when I experience burnout, I'm saying yes to too many of the wrong things, and not saying yes to enough of the things that actually give me joy in my life. Oh. And not to say everything has to be joyful and everything has to be this happy experience, because even working for the church, there are moments that are really, really difficult. But mm-hmm. going off of what you said, CJ, there's such deep and integrated purpose in it for mm-hmm. me that even when it's difficult, I can get through it. Mm-hmm. But I don't really feel that sense of burnout. Yeah. But I remember like the job I worked at before this, I laugh at it now because I worked at an accounting firm. Uh-huh. And if anyone went to college with me, I don't know how I passed my accounting classes. like I got D's. And then I was working at an accounting firm and I'm like, this is clearly not my fit, but this mm-hmm. is the job that offered me something. So mm-hmm. I said yes. And not to make it about like money, but I was making decent amount of money there, especially mm-hmm. coming straight out of college. Mm-hmm. But it sucked everything out of me. And I came home and I would just sleep. And I just had no energy for anything else. And then when I got shifted into ministry, mm-hmm. making less, but I have so much joy in what I'm doing that I don't experience burnout that much. Mm-hmm. And that was one of my life lessons of like, hey, don't just do it because it came across your table.
Right.
Don't just do it because you feel like it's going to fill a need that you feel like you have. But what do you have today in your hands that you're like, I find so much joy in this, and also it blesses other people when I am operating in something that I feel like I am positively contributing to and getting something out of it.
Big.
We did a little training yesterday with our leaders, and one of the brief topics we were talking about is on-ramping new serves onto our teams. And we're like, sometimes you have to talk with people and explore like what are their passions versus like what are your needs in the ministry, because if you place people in the right spot, they can do the work out of passion. They can do the amount of work that it would take 5 wrong people in that same spot.
So true.
So a lot of it, I think, just when you're experiencing burnout, it's like maybe you're not where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with what you both said, but I'm gonna push back a little bit.
Ooh,
Yeah,
do it.
I'm coming
Love
in.
that.
The technical difficulties got me all riled up. But I think you're correct, like I said. But I also think there's something to this, because you may be in the right spot. Just because you don't feel like it doesn't mean you're not. And this is, I think, more what Josh was trying to get at on Sunday. And this is the struggle.
Yeah.
What if you don't like your job, right? You don't have passion for it. Maybe you don't see your purpose in it.
Yeah.
But that's ignoring that God has purpose, and that we're still, in spite of however you might feel, we're still called to do as worship. And that's, I think, a big struggle for people, because it's some people listening might just be saying like, yeah, Jenny, that's great. I can't change jobs. Right. And even when you did change jobs, I'm sure you were still in it for a while, you know, there's no immediate fix there. So I think it requires some kind of mindset change to say like, no, I know I hate it. I know this is the worst, but still. And this is kind of what Josh, I really love what Josh was talking about at the end. He was talking about our spiritual lives, and I forget which one of you mentioned it, but he was kind of laughing at that term, because he's like, if anybody said that to like Jesus, nobody would know what you're talking about. Because your spiritual life makes it sound like it's some part of you, you know, and this compartmentalization that we've done in our world. And that was just really eye-opening for me, I think, and just kind of gave that new perspective. And so what do you guys think about that? Because it is so easy to compartmentalize everything, especially if it's something that you hate. It's so easy to be like, I'm just going to put that in a box, forget about it, and then try and live around it.
Yeah.
But then, of course, Jesus is standing there, and many of us have put him in a box and are trying to live around him when, you know, he wants us to live under him and through him. So what do you guys, where does that take you guys?
Again, I can talk from my experience.
Yeah.
So when I was working at the job that I absolutely hated, I did wrestle with that a lot of like, okay, like, God, this is where I'm at now. I'm not enjoying where I'm at, but I'm here. And so a lot of times the prayers I found myself praying, and just in complete vulnerability, like I did not get along with my boss. It was just a weird dynamic. But I had to focus a lot on the scripture and my prayer life of being like, okay, even though I don't like this person, they are still in a position of authority over me.
Yeah.
And there are scriptures that talk about honoring the leaders in your life. So I'm like, okay, God, even though I don't agree with this person, how can I continue to honor him? Even if we don't get along, even if I don't agree with him, even if I don't like him, and how can I continue of some sort to be a light to the people that I'm working with? And that doesn't mean it was enjoyable. That doesn't mean it was fun.
Yeah.
But it stretched me a lot in my perspective of like, you're not just here to crunch numbers and be at your desk by yourself all day, which could have been easy, but how are you building relationships? How are you talking about God in an office setting that typically, like, that's not the topic of conversation,
Right.
but without shoving it down their throat and being like, I'm a Christian and you should be too.
Yeah.
And so that was like the prayer life that I had at that time, was like, how do I honor someone I naturally just don't want to honor? And how can you use me where I am planted today?
I feel like with me, it's like I'm gonna go back to the purpose thing. Like it's just like finding like that deep like sense of purpose where it's like, I've talked to people in the past about positions and places that I've been, that I've absolutely like hated. And the only thing that kept me was feeling and knowing that God told me to do this thing or to be at that job or to whatever. And then it's kind of like, again, and that's why I'm so big like on prayer and stuff like that, because I talk to so many people like, yo, like, what are you doing if you're not like praying? Like I don't like, how do you stay sane? Like I remember there was a time where I had left a job. I was working at CBS, the television station, doing project management, like IT kind of stuff. And I didn't want to be there. And I remember times in my life where I didn't want to be at a certain job. And then God didn't give me the green light to go. And so for whatever reason, I'm like, I can't move unless God gives me the green light. But with CBS, God did give me the green light, and this is where I'm going. So I left, and then I wasn't working for a period of time. It just so happened I got married at that time. My daughter was born, and I still was not working. And my temptation was like, I have to get into something. But I never felt, I'm praying the whole time. There were people offering me like different jobs and things like that, but I never got the green light from God. But I was broke. Like I had absolutely nothing. Like it was like painful being in it. And I'm like, the temptation like was to move, was to just jump at the first job opportunity that comes through my email or networking, whatever. And God just didn't allow it. It didn't allow me to go forward with it. But then when he finally did give me the opportunity to go forward with what was next, and I ended up getting into like youth and all this extra stuff, I saw it. I saw the purpose like after. But I tell people all the time, there's some things in that season where I wanted to like just jump and move. I would have went against whatever God told me to do if I didn't pray first. If I didn't get that like green light or red light first. So yeah.
Well, and that's so important. I mean, I know we always talk about that here too, but it's so, and you can maybe talk more to this, CJ, because it's so easy for us to say that. It's so easy for you, but I mean, obviously it took you a journey to get there. And you know, how do we, I think that's the biggest struggle. I don't want to speak for our church leadership, but I think that is one of the biggest struggles facing churches today. Is that so many people coming to church just expect to sit there on a Sunday, be told whatever, feel good or better, but they don't want to work on that relationship themselves. And it's like, how many times, unless you do that, you are there's always going to be something. It may not be work. Maybe you love your job, but there's always going to be some aspect of your life that will be ultimately hindered because you are not connecting with God on the level like you're talking about. Because how easy would it have been, like you were just saying, I'm sure you got, like you said, job interviews or offers from other companies, and how easy would it have been to take that, to do that, but you had this relationship with God kind of leading you, and it really is where we have to be led. And so I don't know if you want to talk to that journey or maybe on
I heard a while ago a pastor that I admire or listen to a lot said, you can't, what did he say? You can't lead if you can't hear. You can't lead if you can't hear. And when he talked about hearing, he was talking about hearing from God. And when it comes to leading, the first and most important thing everyone has to lead is themselves. So it's like, I can't like lead myself unless I'm hearing. And so once I really started understanding that, I understood how important it was to absolutely pray, because now it's not just leading myself, but it's my wife and my kids and the people he entrusted me to with the ministry and stuff like that. And so just in that process, just, and not just, you learn it from being obedient over time and seeing God come through.
Right.
And once you get in that pattern, it's like, all right, God, I remember a time before well, I didn't get it. I wasn't working. I had a wife, a daughter. I had no idea. But now that I look back on it, I'm trying to figure out, like, how did you work that out? Like, it was insane, but you did it. Yeah. And so now, like, I tell everybody now, like, in this post-pandemic world, when it comes to leading the ministry and being a leader in the church, it's like, God, what do I do?
Yeah.
It's a total new season, and it's like I'm praying and I'm taking my cues from whatever he says.
Yeah.
And then just going based off what he's done in the past, just the fact that he came through. That's all I need to know.
Yeah.
All I need, if God is going to come through, I'm good. That's all I ever need to know to be obedient to him. I don't got to understand it.
Yeah. And I think also, like, just from hearing your story, something I'm thinking about is sometimes we like to eject out of situations just because they're uncomfortable or we don't see how God's moving. But how is God preparing us in that season for something else that he has for us? Yeah. So whether if that's a different job or it's a different opportunity at the same job, what is God preparing in you in the midst of uncertainty, in the midst of unknown, in the midst of like, what is happening? Like, how are you going to pull through? Yeah. But also on the flip side of that, I'm sure for you, CJ, like you are able to look back at that season now and remember that as like a moment in your life that you saw God's faithfulness of, hey, it does not make sense going through it and it's painful and I wish it was different, but if you had taken a different job opportunity, you may have never had the opportunity to say yes to that youth position and then down the road, like now you're here. Of just a moment of reflection or like one of those moments that you can go and reflect back on when life is getting tough to remind yourself of God's faithfulness and how he used that season that didn't feel good.
Can I jump in one more time?
Oh, please, yeah.
I was speaking to the youth yesterday and we were talking about like waiting on God and stuff like that. And one of the scriptures that I read from was that scripture that in James chapter 1, verse 4, I believe, or chapter 4, verse 1, whatever. It says, let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. And I was telling them, like, that mature part, like, it's a real thing. And so I think back to times in my life. I remember, again, when I was working at this point, I was working at J.P. Morgan Chase. Totally hated it. I was the youngest dude there. I was the only black dude there. Everyone else was like just older, like white guys. And I'm just like, oh, I absolutely hate it. And I'm from Brooklyn Projects Hood. Like, no, I absolutely could have, I just hated it. Like, absolutely, like, hate. I'm trying to explain to you how much I hated it. And I just remember like different mentors and stuff at the time telling me, hey man, like just stick it through. Later on, like now I'm at where I'm at and I'm talking to like other like teens and students and stuff in different areas in their life. I'm like, oh man, like I know your fit, I know the pain, and like I can talk to it. And so now when I'm in like different situations where I'm like, oh, like what am I, like that maturity like comes in, because it's like now it's like I'm mature enough to realize there's other people connected to me. And because there's other people connected to me, again, it's the purpose. The purpose is, I feel like God has shown me purpose is always connected to people. Yeah. Like it's always people on the other side, depending on that you don't even know, that's dependent on you to work as if you was working for God. There's people who's on the other side of that. And so I feel like a lot of it is just that maturity, letting perseverance finish his work so that you may be mature. And so, yeah, I all that to say, I agree.
Agreed.
I agree.
No, that's good. And, we got actually a question from Jordan in the chat. So, and she was so helpful to us. We have to answer her question.
Hey, Jordan, VIP.
Yeah. So she says, can you expound on how you realize or know when God gives you the green light and with things? And Jenny, you're open, of course, to answer this too. I know for me personally, and I do think this might be different. I'm actually interested. Maybe all three of us can go. Because I know for me personally, it's the peace in my spirit. That's when I know that like I'm on the right path. And even, I think, Jenny, you mentioned the joy of God. And that doesn't mean you're necessarily happy, but you can still be joyful, if that makes sense. And we see that with David in the Psalms. No matter how bad his life is, in these Psalms, he's writing these horrible feelings and emotions that he's going through. But he's still able to say, but I have joy in God because I trust you, like you were saying. You've carried me through so much. I know you'll carry me through this. And that's kind of always been what works for me. I know actually same thing with jobs. I've had job offers, and I thought like, oh, this is a good job. And I was like, I can't do that. And it's like, why not? It's so much, even with school, I'm a PhD student, and I've had multiple friends who graduated with me from bachelor's, we did our undergrad, being like, you want a job here? Look how much I'm making. It's like, yes, I really do. I really would love that.
Sign me up.
But just knowing that, like, nah, and now here I am. I'm still in Rochester, and I'm doing stuff, and there's so much of that. Yeah. I don't know that I'd know my wife if I had taken some of those jobs, let alone career and other things. So that's what always makes decisions for me. Is if I know, if I'm at peace with it, then it's probably the right decision, and I'm willing to be wrong on that. Because it's just. That's where I go. But what about you guys? How do you kind of know when you're getting a green light from God?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I want to say that we all operate different. So how God communicates with us is going to be differently. What might communicate to me as a green light is going to be completely different to CJ or Gordon. But the thing at the end of the day is, do you have peace about it? And I think back to, so I've been on staff for the better part of 6 years. But about 2 years ago, I took a 5-month break, not anticipating I would come back onto staff, but the opportunity arose. And when that opportunity arose, I was hesitant about coming back on. And I was fearful, but there was still peace. And I had to learn how to separate the two emotions in my brain and my heart of like, there's peace, but you are fearful because of some things you've experienced. But that fear actually shouldn't be dictating you moving forward. Because it wasn't not peaceful. It was just my own emotions. And, 2 years later, I'm like, wow, I'm so grateful I said yes again. So the biggest thing for me personally is the peace in my heart, in my spirit, whatever you want to call it. And then for me, again, like, this is specifically for me. I think CJ, you mentioned something similar, like all the jobs I've ever done that were purpose driven in the season, I've just never had to apply for. Like the door has just swung on open. Someone has approached me about the position. And I just want to be careful to say, like, that doesn't mean that's what's going to happen in other people's lives, but that's just what I've experienced myself. But at the end of the day, just coming back to that peace. However the signs look in my life personally.
And I'll just jump on I feel like for me, it's 3 things that I can think back in my life that I've known God was giving me the green light. One, again, is peace. You can't, peace is, and it's important to note that, peace isn't, I agree.
Right.
Like, it doesn't mean you want to. It just means, all right, I know I'm not gonna die. That's peace. And then other thing is counsel. Just on a practical level, like any big decision or whatever that I've made, I've always had counsel. People that surround me, people that I've talked to, spoken to, and I listen to them and they kind of pour in. And the last one, for me has been confirmation. So it's like, I rarely ever, moved off of a one time, like, yes, or one time, like, no, or something. I'm always like, all right, I need to hear this again. And God has gotten really specific. Even when I can come to my move to Rochester, God was really specific. And I think he knew, like you said, like he knows how we are and stuff like that. He knew that for this move, he had to be really specific because CJ wasn't going nowhere. But he got super specific. Like, I'm talking to the point, and again, I'm not saying to look for this in your own life. You know, I'm not moving unless this happens, but confirmation will come in its own way. But there was a specific word that I had been given, like, at the start of the year. And the word was remain. And so I remember, like, the word in my mind was the word that God put in my heart was remain, whatever. And then I had some other people talking to me like, well, if it was remain, then that means you should stay. But in my heart, again, it's that peace thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, I just feel it's remain, but it's supposed to be in a different way. So I'm like, I don't know. And I'm just scrolling through, and I just go to a church service that I haven't watched in a while. A specific church that I hadn't watched in a while, and they had a guest speaker come in, and his whole 3 points, everyone started with the word remain, but it was the word remain. It was like remain battle ready, remain on your face in prayer, remain. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like, God, I was asking you, like, how does remain tie into this? And now you give me, all right, it don't get no clearer. All right, and then I still ask for one more thing. but yeah, if that answers the question.
I think it does. And I do think that's such an important thing to note is those kinds of questions. You know, it's almost, I don't want to say impossible, but it's so hard to tell someone an answer to that question, because obviously somebody asking you that question is looking for their own, right? How do I know? What am I supposed to do? And unfortunately, like, none of us can tell you what to do, you know, just like you couldn't tell me what to do, or I couldn't tell you. It is ultimately between you and God. And luckily, I do think this is a good thing, though, is we all have our own relationship with him. And yes, you have to maintain it. Like we've been talking about, you got to be in the word and praying, but, you know, he'll speak to you in ways that speak to you, you know, and go ahead. Yeah.
I want to share, and I think I might have shared this here before, or I shared it somewhere else. But one of the wildest, like, confirmations I ever received when it was coming up here, I remember praying, and I was just at a point with God. I'm just being, like, mad transparent with him. I'm like, all right, God, like, you want me to make this move, but have you considered, and I'm just going through a list of stuff. Yeah. And I'm like, what about my daughter? At this point, my daughter was a little younger, and I'm like, God, like, I can't even get her to brush her teeth yet. God, like, she don't even want to brush her teeth, and she's going to have to go to school. She hadn't been in school yet because it had been COVID. She's been home. Like, she's going to have to go to school. You know how kids get. They start picking and bullying, and God, you know how I am. You know what I mean? Somebody mess with my daughter, then I'm going to look crazy. Like, I'm going to have to turn up. I'm like, is this what you want? Like, I'm having this conversation with her, and I'm like, I'm kind of tight like Gordon was when the switch was off. So I'm like upset. And then God didn't say nothing in the moment. I'm just like venting. Later that morning, my daughter comes into the bathroom, and she's like, Daddy, where's my toothbrush? I'm like, what? Never asked for your toothbrush. She's like, where's my toothbrush? I want to brush my teeth. I'm like, huh? She's like, give me the toothpaste. She gets the toothpaste. She starts brushing her teeth. She rinses her mouth. I'm like, and God is like, I'll even take care of that. Like, what else would you throw to me? Wow. I'm like, dag, all right, babe, I guess we're going. So, yeah.
I mean, I know I speak for at least me when I say we're glad you're here. So,
man. And I'm happy to be here.
We are glad that Anissa brushed her teeth.
Yes. Yeah. But it is, I mean, it's crazy. You know, I know you talk about that. I remember I was talking with a pastor from the church I grew up in, and, you know, she told me a similar story of, so I grew up in Hawaii. I don't know if you guys know that.
I didn't know that.
Which island?
Hawaii.
Okay.
We'll make a island podcast later, but
Island boys.
Who's going to say it?
But they had moved, our pastors were from Texas, and they moved out to Hawaii, and they got like a word, and they didn't see, it was like 15 years later. Wow. When that word, and it was all in this moment where they were moving. I mean, you think moving here from Brooklyn's bad. Imagine going from, Texas to Hawaii.
My gosh.
And like this word from like 10, 15 years ago was made whole there. And it's like, that sucks, but it's awesome at the same time. You know, it's like, because you think about that journey. And I think that's the other problem is, and we were talking about this, what if you're in a job you don't like? You might be there for 5 more years.
Yeah.
It's not about getting out. It's not about where God ultimately delivers you to. It's about what he's doing in you on
That's
that
good.
journey.
It's good.
And if you're not open to it, seeing things, and it could be little things like your daughter brushing your teeth. It could be big things. Like I remember for me, I once, I was trying to get a job and I applied to all these places, and there was like I got one interview.
Wow.
And they called me back and said I didn't get the job. And I'm like, okay, now I'm really in trouble. Literally, like, I hadn't even hung the phone up yet, and I was getting a phone call, and I picked it up, and it was a job I had like applied to like 4 months ago that I forgot I had even applied to. And they're like, we love your resume. We'd love to give you an interview.
Wow.
And it was just like the time, it was like a movie,
Crazy.
And there's just, and I'm sure everybody listening has some kind of story like that. And the point is you have to remember those when you haven't gotten to that point in the current story yet.
Yeah.
That's what's so important is we have to remember, and Josh did talk about this, the order of creation and the purpose of creation. Like, yes, God made man and woman to tend over the earth, but he did not give us that power to like tell him what was right and wrong with his creation.
So true.
And we are, as people are trying, we try so hard to break out of that. And that is that's what burnout is. That's what anxiety is. That's what doubt is. Because we're trying to be in control of something that is ultimately only God can be in control of.
So good.
And so it does, unfortunately, there is no answer. It's like answering Jordan's question. It's like, we can tell you what works for us.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that's something we all have to walk out individually. And so as we kind of gear up for we're wrapping down here, gearing up for the rest of this series.
Yeah.
Just any like last minute thoughts, pointers as far as kind of how to sort of hear these words and these kinds of topics, and really face those difficult truths. And it is truth, it is for me. I know this, like I said, this series will hopefully, I'm very excited for it because this is something I struggle with.
Yeah.
I struggle with work and feeling like it's anything other than a waste of my existence. It's so hard to see any meaning in that kind of stuff. And I know that's wrong. I do know that's wrong, but at the same time, that's what I struggle with. And I'm sure a lot of people are struggling with it. So kind of how do we get through that? How do we break through that wall? As CJ, it sounds like you really have done it. But Jenny, I think you have too. What kind of like, I don't want to say tips. It sounds so silly, but to like kind of gear up and just sort of get us into a better state to receive the upcoming messages as we go through this series.
First couple things that come to my mind is being patient is incredibly difficult. But being patient on our author who's writing our story, because we don't know where in the narrative we are. We can see our present and we can remember our past, but we have no idea about the future. And trying to hand over that trust to the author of our lives, of our story, who knows exactly the pieces and the people and the situations that need to fall into place to get us where we're going. And sometimes it's not that we're not ready. It might be there are people that we need to encounter that aren't ready yet, or the situation or the environment is not ready. So being patient with the author who knows the story that we don't know yet.
Yeah.
And also taking the most of the opportunity of where you're at now. So how can you be a part of someone else's narrative where you are presently planted?
Yeah, that's good. If I had to give one, it's just always remember that God isn't wasting where you are right now. Like, he's not wasting it. Like, and I think that's a struggle for a lot of people.
Yeah.
They feel like, I don't see it. Take solace in the fact that you don't see everything, and it wasn't meant for you to see everything. But God sees it, and God has a plan. He's connecting, and at some point, hopefully, you'll see it all. But even if you don't see it, know and believe the truth that God is going to use where you at right now for His purpose and His glory. And you gotta that's what keeps me going a lot of times.
Yeah. Well, that's good, and hopefully that was encouraging to everyone listening. Thank you all for staying with us through our technical difficulties. Thank you, CJ and Jenny, for talking
Gordon.
with me. So excited to get into this series. Excited to be back. We will see you, church, Wednesday, I remembered that today is not Tuesday. That's impressive. For prayer here at the Prayer Chapel at 6 o'clock. It's definitely something good. If this is a series that maybe is challenging you, what better place to meet that challenge than in prayer with God? So I would encourage us all to do that. Be sure to tune in on Sunday. Come to church. Come, I know, but you can do it. I believe in you. Brave the outside. Come to church. We will see you on Sunday. We'll see you on Wednesday. Church, we love you. Have a great week.
Later.
Oh, I turned the music off. All right, one of these days. Goodbye.